let's do what we can to cover the topic of scholasticism. Scholasticism means that which belongs to the schools, and it is a movement that spans about 1100 to 1500. It's a tool or a method that attempts to reconcile ancient classical philosophy with medieval Christian theology. All right, as scholasticism develops, they're trying to discuss or engage the connection between faith and reason. Okay, so certainly scholasticism is a movement, is an emphasis, is an ideal that is important for us today, because we live in a society that functions on reason, challenges our faith, and so in a sense, scholasticism is apologetics, the attempt to engage reason with faith. Scholasticism, however, does so not so much by means of apologetics as it does this dialectical reasoning or asking of questions. Asking questions, and then that brings up other questions and brings up other questions. Dialectical method, of course, is seen in its origin as being Socrates' method of teaching. All right. The definition of scholasticism: the application of philosophy to theology to systematize, prove, and defend traditional beliefs. The church was the sole interpreter of God's will. Individual conscience was subservient to the church, and there were equal authorities: the Bible, the Fathers, the councils, and the church laws. All right, so these are the four sources of authority for scholasticism. Now, early scholasticism developed with cathedral schools, and you'll remember that it was under Innocent III that the Fourth Lateran Council provided that every cathedral, that is, every church which was the seat of the bishop, would provide a school. So the cathedral schools essentially replaced monastic schools, and universities emerged from these schools. They were either founded by a great teacher, that is, a teacher would emerge and would attract students, or a city-state may decide that they wanted a school, and so they would hire the teachers and attract the students that way. But Universitas was the corporation of persons possessing a common purpose. And these were the earliest universities: Bologna, Salerno, Montpellier, and then Paris and Oxford were the two universities noted for the study of theology. Okay, now some of the issues involved in scholasticism included theories of atonement. All right, up till this point, we had the early church promoted the ransom theory, and then Anselm promoted the satisfaction theory, and then Peter Abelard promoted moral influence. Later on, we'll see John Calvin and the Reformers putting forward penal substitution. Now, Patrick, am I correct that this was the topic of your major paper? Okay, good. So, teach us about the theories of atonement.
Well, ransom, let's start with the, I'll see it up here. Yeah, the ransom, I did four. So the ransom was promoted mainly by Origen, and essentially his argument was that because of the fall of humanity, our souls are held captive to the devil, for which God must pay him for our salvation, essentially, our rescue, our release. And he offered Christ, but the devil was tricked because he didn't realize how powerful the cross would be in ransoming us, ransoming our souls from him. So in that way he lost. But essentially it was God paying a ransom to the devil through the cross for our sin.
Two questions?
Sure.
Maybe one question, one comment, but what is the weakness of this theory of atonement?
Well, it really loses the sovereignty, the supremacy of God, because now all of a sudden God doesn't own our soul. He's not in control. He's scrambling around now trying to fix a dilemma that he sort of lost a handle on. What's interesting, though, about all of these, the second thing I would say is, it's not as if Origen set out to posit a heretical view of the atonement. I mean, he was using a text, specifically Mark 10:45, and I think a couple of texts in Corinthians, but his understanding of the cross and what sin did to humanity was erroneous. But essentially, it put now God on the defense, trying to fix a messy situation.
So this theory actually really elevates the devil higher than
Sure.
it's really.
It's the whips of dualism are way too strong for what the text of Scripture would tell them. But
Okay,
then
okay, I don't want to
Go
interrupt,
ahead.
but before we leave ransom.
sure, let's not leave it.
Okay, I want to ask what story or that's been made into a movie actually has the ransom theory as one of its plot elements?
I have no idea. I mean, obviously the one that comes to mind is the movie entitled The Ransom. but I don't think that even I'm not a movie buff like you, Dr. Bullich.
Okay.
We have a DVD and an analog television. So
Okay, all right.
We don't watch too many DVDs.
I'll open that up. What very famous children's story allegory made into a blockbuster movie? Yeah, Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We see enacted essentially the ransom theory, because Edmund has committed treason. The witch now owns him and demands his blood in payment for his treason, but Aslan offers himself instead, and so he dies in Edmund's place, but then is resurrected, and so because of the deeper magic, then the witch loses her power.
I'm supposed to look, because that's how I chose the teaching option, and that's the illustration I used to open it up. But anyways.
So my question was not clear, but
no, so the satisfaction theory, that was Anselm, I believe. And most scholars would say that he's the first one to really posit a theory for the atonement. I don't. That's hard to really conceive, especially when you have the ransom theory. But the satisfaction theory essentially is Anselm is trying to figure out. I think that the text is cur deus homo. Is that how you say it?
Cur deus homo.
That's probably butchered.
Yeah, why the God man?
Right, so he's trying to figure out why did God have to become man? What's behind the incarnation? And his essential claim is that because of sin, God's character must be satisfied in some way, and that was what the cross is, the satisfaction of mainly the righteousness of God that's been fractured because of sin. And it really has its roots in the Old Testament before the Day of Atonement. That's where you see that illustrated the best. The moral influence theory is kind of comical in that it's just so far from what you would think of as a serious theory of Atonement, and it was mostly rejected, but it's by Peter Abelard, and I think Gustav Ahlin was also one of the proponents of it. That may not be right.
No, Gustav Ahlin is Christus Victor.
Okay, he was the first one. Okay. Moral influence is basically, you look at God's love on the cross, and that morally influences it overpowers you and influences you to love God and others because of that love. It really has nothing to do with sin, has nothing to do with satisfying God's character. It's essentially all about love, and it's more of a subjective theory that influences your life as opposed to satisfying any kind of wrath picture.
Just to back up a moment, satisfaction theory, really you can see in it the feudal system, where God being the Lord and being offended by the vassal humanity, and how is his offense going to be atoned? Well, only someone who is perfect can make that atonement, but only someone who is human can make that atonement. Therefore, we have the God-man. So you can see feudalism very much in the satisfaction theory. And yes, the moral influence theory was never. I mean, it was rejected when Peter Abelard presented it. Rejected by Bernard of Clairvaux, the great staunch theologian of that day. But it was revived again in America under American liberalism. So you can see this idea. It has very much a high view of human achievement in it, so that we can be influenced by the example of Christ. Now, I think that I did assign you the fourth theory of atonement as well. So tell us about that.
The penal substitution theory, which interestingly combines elements from all three of these theories. It takes out what's right and sort of leaves what's not. But it essentially is, it's pretty similar to the satisfaction theory in that what's motivating it is a satisfaction in God's character. The difference is the satisfaction theory doesn't emphasize the substitution element, that Christ died in man's stead to satisfy God's character. It just sort of leaves God's character up here, and there's no substitution, but the penal substitution has sort of this courtroom metaphor working to where God is the judge, and we must be declared right because of God's sacrifice of his Son as our substitute, so we'll not be saved.
What's the, where would you place the origin of the penal substitution theory?
Well, it's essentially this idea of it's a ransom, a
But
debt
who?
paid.
Who was the early proponent of penal substitution?
I think from what I read, the reformers were some of the early ones, Calvin, Luther, which are the biggies.
Right.
But since then, it's really picked up in there's still reform camps, but those are the guys that are ready.
Yeah, very good, very good. All right. Well, thanks for that, Patrick. But so we see that in scholasticism we do have, this is one of the issues that they dealt with was the theories of atonement. Also, we have emphasis on the sacraments. And the idea is that those who were in the universities gained their fame and their prominence because they were able to take traditional Catholic doctrine and support it with philosophy and reason. Anselm of Bec, also known as Anselm of Canterbury, Anselm lived in this 11th, 12th century. Is considered by many to be the father of scholasticism because he applied reason to truth. But he began with applied reason to faith. But he began with faith. He said, "I believe that I might understand." So he began with faith. He's known for his ontological proof for the existence of God. And there it is outlined for you in your notes. So I don't have time to go through it, and I hardly know any more than what's there on the screen anyway. So but this is this ontological proof is kind of a proof from being. It's a proof from within a person's mind. Then the other thing that it's known for is the satisfaction theory of atonement. Why the God-man? All right, the next major figure is Peter Abelard, who taught at the University of Paris, was a later contemporary of Anselm. He had a love affair with Heloise, who was the niece of the canon of Notre Dame. He was teaching in Paris under the authority of Heloise's uncle. He fell in love with her, and actually they had a secret marriage. But when she was discovered to be pregnant by Peter Abelard, the canon sent some thugs to Peter Abelard, and he was castrated for his indiscretion. So he then was left to wander, and he ended up in a monastery. But he's probably best known for his treatise Sic et Non, Yes and No. And this was a collection of traditions from the early church fathers and church laws and scriptures that were kind of written in a kind of a parallel format. And by presenting them this way, he was presenting theological questions and then showing that there were conflicting responses. His intention was to show the inadequacy of human authority. He did not intend it to undermine the tradition of the church. He wanted to stimulate discussion, but in doing so, he stimulated opposition because it did make it appear as if he was a skeptic challenging the authority of the church by presenting conflicting opinions from different sources of authority. So Bernard of Clairvaux was very much opposed to him, called a council who condemned him, and it was at that point that he then went into a monastery. And Patrick has already talked about the moral influence theory of the atonement. Peter Lombard is another major figure in this movement of scholasticism. All right, later scholasticism developed during and after the Crusades, when Aristotle's writings were reintroduced into the West. Aristotle had been pretty much lost because it just wasn't available in the West until the Crusaders found copies and brought them back. Thomas Aquinas was very much influenced by Aristotle's thought, and his writings, we've already talked about his writings against the Gentiles, written to explain Christianity to Jews and Muslims of Spain, and then his Summa Theologica became the high point of medieval theology. Now, we won't have time for Chase to share his research paper, but at least Chase, tell us your topic, because you dealt with Aquinas in one aspect of his theology.
Yeah, I wanted to see how he worked out God's providence with free will and God's sovereignty.
Okay, very good. So, like I say, we don't have time for him to expand on that, but that's available, so I just want you to be be aware of that. Thomas Aquinas, very influential. And whereas we have, on the one hand, we have Anselm's ontological argument. With Thomas Aquinas, we have cosmological proofs for the existence of God. He begins with the world as perceived by our senses, and then working his way backwards shows that the world required the existence of God. So he begins with the cosmos, he begins with the universe, he begins with what we can see and know from our physical senses, and determines from that there had to be the unmoved mover, the uncaused causer. God is the ultimate value. All right, let's just wrap up our study of scholasticism with the effects of this movement. It concentrated on the outward form of theology and philosophy, ignoring the inward spirit of Christianity. So even though it was its goal was to understand the relationship between faith and reason, its emphasis on reason turned theology outward and ignored the inward spirit of Christianity, led to theological hair-splitting on relatively meaningless issues. All right, the very well-known example is how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. All right, this is a ridiculous question, but it comes from the question of, are angels material or non-corporeal? If they are, well then of course you could have an infinite number dancing on the head of a pin. Anyway, as I say, theological hair-splitting on meaningless issues. And it became a tool of the papacy because reputations were built on one's abilities to reinforce the dogma of the church, that is, the sacraments, and thereby you would earn prestige and the favor of the church. And it is for this reason that when we have the advent of Martin Luther and John Calvin, they're going to be very critical of some of the key figures in scholasticism, particularly William Ockham, who comes later in the movement. We didn't really discuss him, but he's there in your notes. Okay? Well, I'm sorry to move so quickly through this lecture, but I knew we were running out of time, but I did want to cover it today so that we'll have time next week to wrap up our semester's discussion.